She closed her eyes and trembled. She would have gone to any jail to have assured Wendy's safety, but to have to endure the railing and the insinuations of something awful on her part that was not true. The possibility of the kidnap having been sexually motivated just made her want to throw up. Why is it that they always thought that right away of people? Because it was true. Or was it because law enforcement people are just sexually repressed Victorians who groove on crime, punishment, spanking, and whippings? Probably. But she trembled anyway. You did your part, she told herself. You kidnapped the kid and you were going to provide her a decent, loving home. God was watching, and he knew it all. You were going to look after Wendy all you could, and you were not going to molest her. And the powers of fate turned on you. Well, fine. Then maybe you weren't supposed to have Wendy Wagner. Get out now, girl. Turn this man around and go back to the airport. Call Bucci from the camp and have her come after you. Stay away from anything to do with Princess Wagner. She's nothing but trouble. Lovable trouble, but trouble notwithstanding. You do not owe that child your very freedom and liberty and life, Teresa. Wendy was a wonderful child, but she did not belong to Teresa Simmons. That was and had to be the bottom line. Wendy was not Teresa's. The law backed that up. God backed that up by not giving her the child as a natural infant. The senator and his old lady backed that up. Sin Devereaux backed it up. Teresa wanted to kill Sin for what she had done. How dare that slit-licker take her child from her for money? The rage that was going on in Teresa's mind over Sin was hot and ripe. It was living. How dare she do that? How dare she cripple up poor little Keisha? Keisha might never walk again, and the pain she was going through, all on account of Sin Devereaux. Witch. Okay, so it's true. Why not tell the cabbie now, Teresa? Why not before he gets to the house? Why not just say, I did all I could, and forget it? It's a dead issue. The child is no longer in your custody, and you don't know where to steal her back again. She put her hand on the seat to get his attention. I gotta get out of this. Fine day, ain't it, little lady? Asked the older cabbie, smiling at her hand on his seat rest. Fine day. Day like today makes a man glad he's free. Free, yes, of course, free. Cabbie, said Teresa, I want you to do something for me. Sure thing, little lady, said the cabbie. You know, I was just telling the missus last night. Gertie, I said, you know what? I said to her, she said what? And then I said to her, there ain't nothing no better in the world than a woman who loves her children. Teresa sat back and swallowed hard. Woman's a funny thing, he continued. Begging your pardon, missy, but they are funny all the same. A woman'll do just about anything underhanded and conniving, as you have surely seen 'em do in your short time, I'm sure. But let a woman become a mother, and the very gates of hell won't stop her from taking care of that young'un. I don't know of a kid alive who deserved the love of its mother, but they get it all the same. Sure, there's mothers what ain't worth killing, but then there's them that'll do anything, face any danger, for the kid. He looked back at her in his rear view and smiled. You ever know of anyone like I'm talking about? She nodded, slowly up and down. I guess your mother was pretty sainted, huh? He asked her, not really expecting an answer. I suppose that she was at that. They whipped into the mansion before she could stop him. Here it be, pretty lady. That'll be $50 even. You have yourself a nice day. She handed him $60 from the amount that had been sent to her, and he thanked her kindly for his tip. She stepped out of the car with that little bag of essentials she had packed out of her belongings to bring on this trip. Bear Ann would have gotten the rest of her things, she figured, or else they would be very safe with Keisha herself. She still had $20 left over from the amount that had been in the envelope. This was indeed a mansion. There didn't appear to be anyone at home. No police cars came descending down all around her like army soldiers. No men in blackout suits yelling for her to freeze right where she was and put her hands up and turn around and bend over and whatever else. Nothing of the kind. She walked up to the end of the driveway and walked through the smallish wrought-iron gate leading into the front yard area. She walked up on the sidewalk and she stepped up to the front porch, where a similar wrought-iron gate enclosed the front door in a fashionable Beverly Hills way. She reached up to touch the doorbell and to ring for someone to let her in. She had to pee so badly. She rang the bell and waited. She looked around her at the perfect California day. Now this was weather. She could get into this. This would be her thing out here. She would have loved to have lived out here in this house. Even in this place. The door opened and there stood a maid in a black and white outfit. The dress rose up high and back, and her bosom was absolutely framed in a flimsy bodice. Her legs were long and her butt was tight, and she appeared to be on tiptoe in the high heels. She looked like a maid from a porno movie, one who gets disciplined by the lady of the house with the leather-covered riding crop. "Hello," said the maid. "You must be Madame de Borghese. Welcome home." Teresa blinked at the woman. "No, my name is... I'm sorry I don't have your coffee ready yet, ma'am. Please do not be angry. I know how frightfully awful it must be to have to take a cab from the airport. We have had to release Charles from our employ. He was always late. I myself am replacing Susie, who was the maid here, and I hope to aspire to her status she held before she started taking heroin again. Pleased to meet you, ma'am." She held out her hand, and a stunned Teresa shook it. "Now," said the girl, "I have to run over town and pick up some supplies. Your daughter will be home presently, and so your bath is drawn for you. I hope everything is where you hope it will be." She passed Teresa on the way out and smiled, leaving her, ostensibly, alone and in charge of the whole house. Teresa could not get over this. As the woman walked quickly out to the garage, Teresa called after her. "My daughter," she said, "who is—" "The Princess Wendelise," said the maid, smiling, "will be along shortly, ma'am." Wendelise. Princess Wendelise. Wendy. The message had been true. Wendy was supposed to come out here today. Teresa watched the maid go into the garage and start a car. The gate came open at the foot of the hill, and the garage door tilted up to allow her to drive out and down the hillside. It looked much steeper from up here in the house. Teresa would never see that maid again. She looked around at the splendor of the house she had been left with. It was a gorgeous place. A place to save for all your life and never get paid for. A place for idle rock stars and other unappreciative types. Mafia, movie legends. That sort of soul was housed in places like this. But not first-grade teachers fleeing the law. Not Teresa Simmons kind of people. They had no business in such places as this. They belonged in jails and places of bad punishment. They belonged behind bars. Teresa wandered around, and she looked at the massive blue-watered pool. She walked over to the combination kitchen-dining room area, divided by a serving bar. The look was painfully California. There was in the den, if that's what they called it out here, a freestanding red conical fireplace, ready to ignite. There was a massive stereo system and a wall of rack components. She walked over and saw that there was a CD catalog second to none. She pulled out the best of the Doors, and she saw her song, a work known as Riders on the Storm. She opened the box and considered the rounded disk of rainbow refracted light. She popped the CD out of the case carefully. She walked over and pressed the on power button on the preamp, and then on the amplifier itself. These machines hummed to life. She then pressed the on button for the CD player, and she pressed open-close to activate the door. On the 200-disc changer, a small section opened for her. Placing the CD in the area, of the depression, she pressed close again, and this time the drawer closed, swallowing into its depth the Best of the Doors CD, side 1, as it did so. She then turned the small knob on the receiver to CD and pressed selection number 4, her song. The Best of the Doors was actually 2 CDs in the box, but she had selected the one she wanted, the one that had her song on it. The song began to play. There was gentle rain falling, and then that old familiar boodle-doo, boodle-doo keyboard intro. Yeah, it felt better in here already. She loved Riders on the Storm. She walked over and looked into the other rooms from the hallway. There was a master bath, and a bath had been drawn for her, steaming hot as promised. She was tempted to get in it. Impulsive move, yeah. Very impulsive move, Wendy coming and all. But how long had it been since she had bathed? She was beginning to get that musky, sexy smell from herself now, and she didn't care too much for that. Time to bathe. She slowly started unbuttoning her blouse, and a thrill went through her. She was licking her lips in anticipation. She hoped no one would be by before long. She had unconsciously set the Riders on the Storm song for continuous loop. She could hear it perfectly in the bathroom area, because there was a speaker system in here as well. She dropped her jeans and felt positively seduced by the bath, calling to her. She was getting turned on by the prospects of sitting her naked little tail down in some hot water. Oh, it was going to feel so good. She hissed her breath as she quivered. Her panties came off with a thrilling move, and she was naked at last. Her shoes and socks were under the pile of clothing. Her nipples were tight and tall. Hissing from the pleasure, she stepped into the water, which was perfect. Caressing her body with her hands, Teresa Simmons sat down and forgot her own name for a long while. No one bothered her for the next 4 hours. Chapter 20. In the time that followed, Sin and the 4 horsemen shared the same road, unknown to each other. Sin was ahead of the 4 horsemen by about 50 yards or more, but the curves in the road kept Bear Ann from spying her out, just ahead of them. Had Sin known that the 4 horsemen were back there, following her, she would have taken evasive action. Had Bear Ann known that they were just behind Sin's bike, they would have gone a lot faster to catch her and get her good. As it was, all 5 bikers were enjoying a very leisurely pace, heading towards St. Louis, Missouri. Sin rode along now, lost in her thoughts. Bear Ann and Lickety Split were in front of Spanky and Geisha, riding along the roadway. The sun was hot and bright, and all 4 of them were worried about little Wendy Wagner. The child was so precious to them all that it was hurting them badly inside. They could not wait to lay hands on Sinner Devereaux. Bear Ann had contemplated accidentally killing the woman some way or other. Spanky had been crying for little Wendy all morning. It was awful that Sin had swiped her like she had done. Just awful. Of course, there was no proof that Sin had done this, but Keisha's premonitions were never wrong. They were taking it as fact that Keisha had premonized properly, and had seen not only who had set the steel trap for her foot, but why. Why the trap had been set, so little Wendy could be swiped. They all believed in Keisha's premonition prophecies. The prophecy that said Sin had swiped the kid for money after purposely maiming their friend. Keisha had been Sin's friend, too, at one point. They had all been friends with the sinner. Bear Ann and the girls decided to stop for lunch under an old tree up ahead. Keisha, God lover, had prepared a lunch for them all in advance of their leaving. She had some refrigerated PB&J sandwiches for the girls, apples, cheese chunks, and other goodies for them. Bear Ann was definitely going to take Sin Devereaux when she saw her. They were all soon picnicking under the tree. Spanky was in an orgiastic and uncontrolled reverie over her apples and cheese. "These things taste great together," Spanky said. Bear Ann laughed at the child's lack of knowledge in such traditional foods, and tears came to her own eyes when she saw that Keisha had packed them, of all things, a big slice apiece of her apple pie. Bear Ann sniffed and showed Lickety-Split the pie. "Aw," said Lickety-Split. "When did she have time to make that, Bear?" They all had a big old piece in their sacks. "She's a true saint," said Geisha, her eyes as bright as Bear Ann's. "Isn't she?" "Yep," said Bear Ann, "and God help Miss Devereaux if I get my hands on her." They were all silent over this, though the four horsemen were peaceable enough. As lesbian bikers go, they were peaceable, but a person didn't want to mess with them. Once they all four got collectively pissed off, a perpetrator didn't have a ghost of a chance. "We gon' mess with her big time," said Geisha. "You reckon we'll ever see her again?" asked Spanky, wonderingly. "Dunno," said Bear Ann. "I hope so." They finished their lunches and mounted up again. Kicking their chrome ponies to life, they took off north. Soon it would be time to do oil checks and get gas, and they would all stop to fill up. There was a gas station ahead, about 5 miles away. It was called a Starvin' Marvin, whatever that was. From their vantage points, Bear Ann signaled to Lickety-Split that they would stop there and service up their bikes. Lickety-Split nodded, and Spanky and Geisha both picked up on it as well. They would follow wherever the first two went, anyway. The Starvin' Marvin was just ahead of them. There was something else at the Starvin' Marvin just now. A lone bike outside the ladies' room, and inside, on the filthy white commode, taking a monster dump, was a biker broad. Outside, painted on the green side of her gas tank, were the words, "Sinner," in black script. She would be in there for a few minutes yet. She had just lit a second cigarette to kill the smell in there. Teresa Simmons had fallen asleep in the great bathtub. She was perched in the seated end, an area designed for sleeping or shallow water reading. The bathtub itself was as large as a small wading pool, and the temperature was constant. She was about as relaxed as she could be. "Don't get up," said a man's voice from the doorway. Teresa, lying there all naked and splayed, was too stunned to move. "I've seen everything you got before anyway," smiled the man, who had the face of a woman. "I just want to tell you something, and then I'll go." That seemed fair enough. "Okay," she said. "What do you want?" "First of all," said the man, "Wendy's here. She came with me and Belinda. Now, I know that Belinda is Sin's former, but she's switched sides. She's leaving the gang and going straight. It didn't take too much convincing, actually, but that's neither here nor there. And it certainly doesn't concern you, does it?" She shook her head no, snaking her hand down to cover her genitals. "Now," said the man, "here's the deal. The senator owns this place, and as long as you want to be Mrs. Tuborgesa and stay here and raise the child, you get to do that. He has given you full run of this place, and Dame doesn't even know it exists. Now you have no real choice in the matter, Teresa. You are the one who wanted the child to raise. Now you got her. She's all yours." Teresa listened to him intently. "How's that sound so far? Pretty good?" She nodded up and down weakly. He was Jim Morrison resurrected. He had to be. "He looks like me," smiled the man, reading her mind. "And Riders on the Storm is my favorite, too." She managed a weak smile. The song had looped through about 100 times already, and still she wasn't tired of it. Of course, she had slept through most of it. "So, you want the kid and live in this gilded cage, or do I send the child to Daddy again?" "No," said Teresa. "No. I'll take her. I'll live here with her, as long as it takes to raise her." "A cage is still a cage," he warned her, most poetically. "And the child is a big responsibility. Have you got what it will take?" "Mister," said Teresa, sitting up, nude and uncovered, not caring what he saw of her now, "listen to me. I was going to raise her on my back if I had to. I would have sold my body sexually to keep that child. Yes, I'll raise her for the senator. Yes, my life has been forfeited with this kidnapping. I couldn't get a job at Burger Doodle now." The man smiled at her, saying, "I believe that. I believed it when the senator told me about you. I have had some contact with him since taking Wendy back again. He is very convinced of your bravery and intentions. So was I. I stole Wendy from Sin, and from the looks of Belinda, I think I took her too." "Well," said Teresa, "I'm glad Sin doesn't have her any more." "So's Wendy," said the man. "Wendy, come on in here and say hello to Mama." Wendy peeked bashfully around the corner, her hands up to her mouth. "Hi, Mama," she said, smiling through her fingers. "Hi, baby," said Teresa, beginning to cry. Wendy came over to the tub and sat down beside Teresa. Teresa reached up and kissed Wendy on the cheek. "I missed you, pretty girl," said Teresa. "I missed you too, Mama," said Wendy. "Mr. King here, he helped me to find you again." Teresa looked up at the man confused. "Mr. King?" she asked the man in black. "Lizard King," said the man, Morrison again. "I swear I carry him around like an albatross." Teresa laughed and said, "Well, Mr. King, thank you for your time, and if there is anything I can do for you—" "You can," he said quietly. "You can look after that adorable little lady there." "I will do it," smiled Teresa. "Bet on it." The man who looked like Jim Morrison, Rack Davies, stood up and smiled at the both of them. "Ladies," he said, "I bid you good day. Wendy, you mind your mama now. She's done a lot to have you here." "Yes, sir," she said quietly. "And thanks for the filet mignon. I like that a lot." He laughed. "You're entirely welcome, child." "Goodbye, then." "Goodbye." That was all he said, and when they had answered him, he was gone. Gone like the rider in the storm. Keisha might have been right about him. He certainly was the killer fellow in the room with him. He had seen all she had before. Yeah, he must have taken a life in his time. But he'd also made restitution as well. He had saved a life. 2 lives. He had saved Wendy and Teresa and given them a life together. In Teresa's way of thinking, that made 3 lives. Just like the rider in the storm. He was here and gone, and for a moment she had met Jim Morrison's ghost. She had always had the hots for the Lizard King. Who didn't? Maggie used to fantasize about him every night. But only Teresa, naked in a tub of water, had ever actually met the man. And like any good man worth his manhood, he had given her a child. This child. Her favorite one. As the song started again from the other room with that familiar beedle-diddle-dee, intro, she heard the front door shut with an authoritative whump. He was gone, and Teresa found herself missing a man she did not even know. Rack Davies was on a jet plane headed for Europe that very evening. The airport at LAX had been hectic getting through it, but he was finally seated on board a first-class seat, counting his money in his mind and relaxing with a zombie cocktail, mixed to three-fingered perfection. Lovely stewardess, he thought, the things she could do. He was tired and felt good. He had done something good for a change. He had not had to kill anyone, and he had not had to hurt anything either. Well, fine. He had deserved this trip, and now he would spend the next few weeks wandering around Germany. He would go back to Munich and Berchtesgaden. He would tour Austria, and go see the Von Trapp house again, where one of the most famous family escapes ever had been accomplished. He smiled at that. Down the little side path had walked the original Maria Von Trapp. Down that same side path the actress Julie Andrews had walked, playing the part of Maria. And finally he himself had walked down that same path. Now whenever he would see that movie in the little side path, that would freak him out, because in the movie version he had not yet walked down that path. Somehow or other, that was terribly otherworldly. Film had always freaked him out. So did lesbians, for that matter. He smiled to recall Belinda. He had taken her virginity for her. He had anointed her into the world of men. Yes, that was worth the price of admission right there. How many cherries had 007 ever taken, he wondered. And how many had that wonderful Lizard King ever scored? Well, he had that killer charm about him, too, and that insulated him and helped make him popular, even with the ladies he had had to hurt. He had always thought that there would be one woman to take him and make him want her badly enough, but he had never met her before. Oh, sure, Belinda had thought she was the one all along. He sighed. Belinda was a fantastic woman. He had always thought that a woman would take him and make him stop his wicked ways, stop killing, and start being a family man. Yeah, he had always thought someday, but as the days had gone by, he had lost his faith in that sort of thing. That only happened in fantasy. He closed his eyes and heard Belinda in his mind's ear beg him. She was begging him to take her with him. The night he had taken her virginity, he had sworn to take her with him. But wasn't that the standard pat answer for all bimbos? Yeah, babe, I'll marry you, and it'll be good for us forever, and I love you back more even. Yeah, babe, I really do. Sure. What a load. But still, he sat comfortably now thinking of Belinda. Belinda was dynamite, one of the few to move him to such feelings. Was it because she had been a lesbian virgin punk in an all-girl bike squad? What was it? Was that why he would remember her as fantastic? He had never bedded a biker dyke before. And to have her convert like that, man, that was something. She had done him that way. And the gentle, persistent squirm of her against his mind would be enough to keep him fantasizing about her and her ways for a long time. Rack Davies had searched the world for a perfect woman, one who would, in her body and workings, glorify his soul as a symbol of maleness unparalleled. He didn't want to be compared to Jim Morrison. He wanted to excel Jim Morrison. But if it got him babes, well, what of that? He didn't really want babes. He wanted the woman, the iconoclast of sex, man. He wanted Diana and Venus on the half-shell, Lady Godiva, an Elizabeth Taylor, Cleopatra-type goddess. Peel me a grape, baby. He wanted a woman who would perfect him, Murder perfected him, and it was a temporary thing. Money perfected him not at all. Poetry, which he wrote constantly when he was alone, perfected him in its way, but like all poetry, it dared him to greater things. And like Morrison himself said, all poetry is full of wolves, except the one poem, the one he couldn't get his hands on. Poetry was tempting, it really was. In his lifetime, he had sneaked into people's houses and watched them live their lives, eating, bathing, defecating, having sex, either alone or with someone. He was surprised at the number of women who liked it better alone. Watching television, planning murders of their own, plotting adulteries, praying, crying, yelling, staring. How many people just like to go into a room and stare at the wall? Listening to music, spanking children, washing dishes, reading, and a host of other things too bizarre to mention. But how could people sit, watch television, and pick their noses for hours at a time, rolling the byproducts into little balls and throwing them across the room as if that would cause the booger to go away? How many people like to sing in their houses when they were alone? How many people like to break noiselessly into other people's houses and watch all that crap? Him. Oh, he loved it. Belinda would be perfect for him, he felt. "Hey," said Belinda, touching his arm. "You asleep?" "No," he said, shaking his head. Yep, this time he had taken Belinda with him, and so far he wasn't the least bit sorry he had married her. For that is what he had done. Before they had gotten on their flight, he had asked, she had accepted. Wild, impulsive, crazy. Feeling good to him and feeling good to her. He couldn't wait to make love to her as his wife. That was going to be the best of all. No adultery. Marriage sex was going to be the best high. Way, way high. After all, hadn't Morrison tried marriage himself with that Corson chick? Yeah. Pamela Corson Morrison. Sounded like a bad poem, Jim. Being married was like once again having Mama back in some way. She had slipped her hand into his, and the feeling was kind of maternal. But now he could once again have Mommy at night. None of his whores had ever given him this, but Belinda had been able to do it. She had replaced Mama, for unlike Mama, Belinda could give him that sex he needed to make love for comfort rather than just the get-off game. Oh, wow, to comfortably, languidly take her. He got thrilled just thinking about it. Here was a woman who could do that for him. Wife. What a concept. Belinda snuggled close, and Rack Davies felt his heart skip a beat. He kissed the top of her head and silently thanked Providence for his good fortune. The old lady getting her gas looked up from her checkbook as she heard the roar of approaching motorcycles. Parked at the full serve of the Starvin' Marvin, she could see all the way around to the bathrooms, where yet another bike was parked, by the ladies' room. Indeed, these men must think they are ladies, she sniffed, as she signed her checkbook, Mrs. Okie Peroki, and dated it for the attendant. She watched as these long-haired boys, terribly feminine-looking, dismounted their motorcycles and stood up to try and stretch life back into their legs. Suicide machines, her mother used to call motorcycles. Death-wish bikes. One of the bikers was spanking himself, trying to restore circulation. The obvious leader, a tall, brown-haired looking mongrel varmint with a smile and a sneer, all at once, motioned to the others to go inside and get something. Maybe a haircut, she asked herself. She had lived all through the 50s, 60s, and 70s. She had witnessed the confusion of the children of the 80s because of the sins of the fathers, and she knew the 90s would be even worse. In the 90s, there would be no identity confusion to slow down the pace. By the 90s, pure evil would run unchecked in the streets. There weren't flower children trying to gain world peace through unpeaceful means anymore. There weren't no disco children either. They were just a lot of mean types like these boys. She looked again and saw that she was wrong. These were not boys. She stared at these girls as they took off their denim jackets with some sort of vile bat's wing thing on the back. She couldn't read the inscription thereupon, and she felt like she didn't really want to. As they got set up, one of them, a tall-looking thing who had been androgynously accompanying the leader, smacked the leader on her arm and pointed over to the bathroom, where sat a motorcycle just like their own. The leader seemed to be overjoyed by this. Old Home Week, thought Mrs. Pierogi. We ought to celebrate meeting our nasty friend here by robbing the place. Something to remember this day by. She wanted to get out of here before whatever surfaced from inside the bathroom. Probably the very goddess of the flies herself, Satan's own sister image. The attendant was certainly taking his own sweet time getting out to take her money. She sniffed impatiently towards the booth, but he didn't appear. She turned back now to watch the 4 biker broads as they waited for their friend to come out. "Let's all go get tattooed in honor of this occasion," she chuckled to herself. "Or maybe get a few metal rings implanted in our sex organs so we can play with them later." She had read about that in a magazine called Body Piercing. The 5th one came out, wearing the same colors as the other girls. But this 5th angel was not happy to see the other 4 at all. She tried to go back inside, but the leader, the brown-haired looking dyke, this leader grabbed her and hauled her backwards into the parking lot, turning her to face them all. The leader told the tall one, who had been her partner on the way in here, to hold the 5th one they had just taken captive. The tall blonde did so, securing an arm bar on the unfortunate woman. The other 2, besides Leader and tall Blondie, stood beside the first one watching. One of these looked like a Japanese, and the other one, the one who had spanked herself, looked just like an innocent child. Probably holding her captive as well, she thought. So Leader, tall blonde Japanese girl, and the spanking one squared off against this rough-looking other, older biker. Because of the age difference, probably. Mrs. Oki Pierogi was siding with the underdog, the one she called 5th biker, the one that had Sinner on the side of her motorcycle. As she watched in horror, Japanese girl whipped out a blade and she handed it to Leader, who threatened to cut 5th Rider's throat for her. 5th Rider was terrified now. Leader finally tossed the knife back to Japanese girl, who caught it without even looking. Leader then drew back her hand and slapped 5th Rider. 5th Rider was down like a rag doll. Leader then proceeded to kick 5th Rider, who lay there in the dust cowering like an infant, begging for mercy. Leader continued to kick at the woman like she was enraged at her for something. This was Judgment Day. As she watched Spanking One walk off to the green motorcycle that belonged to 5th Angel, she watched her take the cap off and smell down into the tank. Satisfied that it had fuel in it, she looked over to Japanese girl and nodded. Japanese girl whipped out a set of manacles from somewhere and secured them to 5th Rider's handlebar assembly. Leader, meanwhile, had picked up 5th Angel, who was bleeding from the corners of her mouth, and she pulled her close as if to explain something to her. 5th Angel, totally exhausted from her beating, nodded up and down weakly. Leader turned 5th Angel around, and she tore 5th Angel's colors off her back, pulling away a great patch off the denim. It left a worn, lighter imprint of bat's wings that had been there on the patch. Leader threw the patch down in the dirt and stomped it flat. She then took 5th Rider over to her own bike and made her get on it and sit there. 5th Angel was now aboard the bike that said Sinner on the gas tank. Leader then secured 5th Angel's hands to her own handlebars by means of manacles or handcuffs. Then she slapped her once more to get her attention. Leader then shoved a thumping finger into 5th Angel's chest, making her point perfectly clear to 5th Angel, who nodded, tired and exhausted. They then told her to kick-start her bike and follow them. Leader sat with 5th Angel on her bike, blocking 5th Angel's escape, if she chose to make it, over by the tire rack, while Leader's girls filled their tanks and purchased their food and snacks. The attendant must have seen them coming and had gone to hide. Well, Mrs. Okey-Poroky would certainly report his rude cowardice to the manager. How dare he not come out and take her check when these biker broads had shown up? How dare he not call police to come to the aid of Fifth Angel, as he should have done? Men, such pansies. A few old lesbian bikers, and he runs scared. She swallowed as the other three came back out of the store, laden with their goodies. They walked over to the Leader and Fifth Angel, and then divided up their stuff. Leader offered Fifth Angel a swallow of beer, which, considering she had just beat the heck out of her, was quite decent of her. And then they started their bikes to leave. Fifth Angel already had hers running. The 5 bikes pulled out of the parking lot without further ado. "Here you are, ma'am," said the attendant, as though butter wouldn't melt in his mealy coward's mouth. She gave him the check and drove over to the spot where the patch had been thrown down on the ground. Careful not to be seen peering down at the thing, she put her car in park and leaned out of the car window, to better study the winged-looking thing on the ground before her. It really was a pair of bat's wings. It was as though the bat's material had been pulled out of a motorcycle tire. Some twisted art, definitely. The spokes formed great struts, supporting hideous bat's wings, and the whole thing looked like a coat of arms for Dracula. It was beautifully hideous, Dionysian, sensual, beautifully terrifying. She swallowed and read the logo in the wings, and under the assembly as an identifier to the whole affair. It read, Hell's Succuba, and under that, Sinner Devereaux. That was all it said, lying there in the accumulating dust. Chapter 21. When Rack had gone, little Wendy had stripped off her things and had crawled into the master bathtub with Teresa, who sat languidly in the seated end of the tub. She smiled as Wendy got undressed and got in beside her. Wendy sniffed and snuggled up close to Teresa. "It's good to see you again, Wendy," said Teresa, unsure of what else to say to the child. "I did not purposely let sin take you like that. I hope you know." "She snuck up on me," sniffed little Wendy, as the heat of the water made her feel good. "I didn't know what else to do, but she put a rag over my mouth and it smelled bad." Chloroform, that witch. Teresa felt her blood boil. "And then I had a headache," said Wendy, going for as much sympathy as she could get. "It was awful, Mama." Wendy lay her pretty little blonde head on Teresa's chest and settled right in. The kid was in her glory hole for sure, no denying that. The child wished to be right here in her mama's arms, no matter what. Teresa held and kissed her for a long time. "I guess," said Teresa after a while, "that your daddy set this place up for us. I guess we'll be living here. Is that okay with you, Wendy Wee?" Wendy nodded up and down, smiling at her. "You miss me, Wendy Wee?" "Yeah, awful bad." "Well, I'll never have to be away from you again if the senator is looking out for us," said Teresa, holding the child. There was a television in the upper corner of the bathroom beside the tub, and there was a waterproof remote control nearby. Teresa reached over and picked it up. She pressed a button, and a television screen picture came on, drowning out Riders on the Storm in its loop cycle. The television now took precedence. "This is CNN Midday and Beyond. We are here at the home of Senator and Mrs. Wagner at their Virginia estate near the town of Beluga. The Senator and Dame have graciously agreed to an interview We take you there now to a press conference held earlier." The scene shifted, and there stood Dame, and just behind her, the senator. "We will do anything in our power," said Dame, reading from a prepared text. That old witch wouldn't dare do anything as risky as answer a media question, God forbid. No, it was all prepared text for Dame. "We will do everything in our power," she continued, "to see the safe return of our daughter. She will be returned to us, and the guilty party will be held to answer for this crime, I can assure you. The senator and I have already filed formal kidnapping and abuse charges against Teresa Ann Simmons, who has taken our child and has thus violated state statutes in the matter." "Mama," said Wendy, ignoring the television, "what's a lesbian?" "A what?" asked Teresa. "A lesbian," she said. "What is a lesbian?" "A lesbian?" corrected Teresa. "You want to know what a lesbian is?" "Yeah," she said, afraid that it meant something evil. "Okay," said Teresa, taking a deep breath. "Whew, boy, you sure are getting a lesson here lately." She lowered her voice and said, "Honey, a lesbian is like the women we just were with." "You mean they ride motorcycles?" asked Wendy in wonder. "Some of them," said Teresa. "Yes, some of them do." "Nen, are we lesbians too, 'cause we rode their motorcycles?" asked Wendy. "No," said Teresa. "No, we aren't lesbians, honey. We're normal. They are like they are because they want to be, but you don't have to be like them just because you ride their motorcycles." Teresa was fumbling, grasping for straws. Wow. How could she prove to little kid that she wasn't a lesbian? Wendy shook her head, saying, "Mama, I don't want to have sex with nobody, never." "That's the way it should be for a while," said Teresa, touching the child on her cheek. "That's because you are a beautiful, innocent little girl, and you stay that way as long as you can." "Okay," said Wendy. "But what's a lesbian, then?" "It's a woman," sighed Teresa. "It's a woman who wants to be with another woman, in the way we talked about men and women being together. You know, down there and all." "Oh," said Wendy. "So then Baron and Lickety Split and Geisha and Spanky, they're all lesbians." "Yeah," said Teresa, shaking her head up and down. "But why are they like that, Nen?" asked Wendy. "Because something happened to them when they were little," said Teresa. "They were in some way abused and hurt, and they didn't finish developing all the way to the point where they wanted men." "How do you know all that, then?" asked Wendy. "I read a lot," said Teresa, nudging the child. "And I have some little kid named Wendy Wagner asking me millions of questions before she's old enough to be concerned with any of them. That's why." Wendy giggled loudly, and Teresa goosed her tiny belly playfully. The senator was watching them in the tub together. As Teresa looked up at the television, she could see the cameraman panning in close, over Dame's shoulder, onto the face of the senator. The senator was staring right at the television, and he and Teresa had formed a sort of eye contact. And at that moment it happened. Dame was running her mouth concerning Teresa and how evil she was to have taken her baby girl from her, and the cameraman was now full face on the senator, with the woman Dame mouthing in the background audibly. Teresa felt like the man was looking right at her as the camera hovered on his face. He was looking right at her. She could feel it. It was at that moment the senator deliberately winked at the camera. Teresa's breath caught in her throat. He had actually done that, hadn't he? It was no trick of her imagination. He had winked at the camera. A brief little flutter of a wink, but a deliberate wink nonetheless. The senator had sealed his approval on the act that his wife was standing in front of him, hotly denouncing. Teresa shuddered in her soul and looked around her. Well, he must surely approve, or else he wouldn't have given her this place to live, and wouldn't have sent Wendy here, and She reached over and kissed little Wendy on her cheek. Wendy smiled at her and began splashing playfully. "All rise," said Pinch, the bailiff. "The High Court of Hell Succuba is now in session, the Honorable Bucci Simmons presiding. Take your places and show respect. Oyez, oyez, oyez." Bucci Simmons walked into the meeting room and over to a long table, where sat her horsemen and several other succuba higher up in the hierarchy. Bucci took the main place in their midst and waited for the charges to be read. Sin Devereaux was then brought before Bucci in chains. Actual chains. They had her tied hand and foot and brought her into the courtroom. They took her over to the seat of the condemned, where she would be tried. "Madam President," said Leatherheather, acting as prosecution for the state, "I have charges against yon accused, ma'am. Please the court, I might read 'em off." "So ordered," murmured Bucci, looking at Sin Devereaux with a fierce glare. "Please the court, then," said Leatherheather. "May it be known by all that this Sin Devereaux stands accused of 3 capital crimes." "List them, please, Madam Prosecutor," said Bucci. "Yes, ma'am," said Leatherheather. "Be it known by these presents, then, that one Sin Devereaux, also known as Cynthia Denise Devereaux, late of the 8th Squadron. Be it known that the first capital offense is treason against Bucci Simmons and her leadership. Also that offense includes the enhanced penalty of conspiracy to commit murder on said Bucci Simmons after her overthrow." "So noted," said Bucci. "What else, Madam Prosecutor?" "Yes, ma'am," said Leatherheather. "The second charge, then, is capital crime of aggravated assault on a member of this group. Sin Devereaux is accused of laying a steel trap to ensnare one Keisha Lee and thereby cripple her for life." "So noted," said Bucci. "Read on, Madam Prosecutor." "One charge remains, Madam President," said Leatherheather. "One charge to go. That charge is also a capital offense, punishable by death. It is the abduction and endangerment of member Wendy Wagner, also known as the Princess Wendelise Kachina Tuborgesa, the new daughter of Teresa Simmons, also a member." "So noted," said Bucci, fury rising in her voice. "And is that all?" "That is all," said Leatherheather. "That is all we have against the accused." "Defense?" asked Bucci, of the defense attorney, played by Spike, the former lover of Sin Devereaux. Spike stood up and said, softly, "We have nothing to say nor add, Your Honor. She is guilty as she can be of everything and freely admits her guilt. She wishes to throw herself upon the mercy of the court." There was a murmur in the crowd. This was surely a ploy. It had to be. "By confessing guilt," said Bucci, "you set yourself up for a death penalty for your client, Spike. Capital crimes are all punishable by death." "We also know," said Spike, "that you have never executed anyone before now, capital crime or not, and that to admit one's guilt is golden in your sight." "Law is law," said Bucci. "We plead leniency," said Spike. "We throw ourselves at your feet. Why keep this going any further? You know what happened." "So do you," said Bucci, rising to pass judgment. "So do you know, and so you do plead leniency. Then let us hold this court no longer in suspense. I've already planned out what I would say, and I have it all ready to read." Sin Devereaux shook in her seat and rattled her chains. "Bear Ann wants to kill you, you miserable witch," yelled Bucci, breaking her own order, "and I want to let her do it. How is that?" Sin looked at her with sick eyes. There were unexplained bruises on the woman's face. "But here is the way it will be done. The cops never come in here, for your information, Miss Spike. They do not want to tangle with 1,000 Sapphist witches all at once. We could execute Sin and never get caught. That is law within these gates. I will have you know that. You will be confined to the jail until such time as Wendy Wagner's whereabouts are determined. If she is dead by misadventure caused by you, or something that you had part in, you will be put to death. You will face the 3 glasses as your own fate will predict." Sin swallowed fearfully. The 3 glasses were large tumblers full of iced tea, One of them was loaded with a lethal dose of chloral hydrate. The other two were not. Sin's nostrils were to be sealed with wax, and she would have to drink from one of these glasses without being able to smell. If she died, she was killed by fate. If she lived, she would be beaten and set free. If she ever showed her face again, she would again be beaten and again set free. But if she died, they would bury her. You are herein remanded over to our jailer, Anaphylaxis, who will keep you in stir until such time as we might determine what is going on with the child Wendy Wagner. Pray that she isn't dead, Sin Devereaux, and pray that the worst thing you get is a bare butt beating by Baran, and then banishment. I have decided that you will never return to this group again. You are a disgrace to us all, and as soon as you are punished and one way or the other disposed of, the sooner we can get back to some settled order of normalcy. Sin sat motionless. Even now her cold heart did not stir within her. "That is all," said Bucci. "Take her out of my sight." Sin was led from the massive meeting room with all eyes on her. There were about 300 women in the room, another 250 waiting outside, looking through the windows. The rest were milling around the compound, awaiting word on the trial proceedings. Bucci would have to be strict with her to maintain their respect, but there was a soft spot for Sin Devereaux in Bucci's past. Sin was one of the charter people who had fallen from grace after a long and distinguished service record with the butcher. Indeed, Bucci had just as well wanted to let her have Hell's Succuba when she had taken it over. It would have been like Batman turning Gotham City over to a hostile little Robin. It would have still been all in the family. But Sin couldn't run jack, let alone a motorcycle club, so she had lost it all. As Sin was being led out of the room with all the hostile eyes upon her, she knew one thing for sure. If Wendy Wagner turned up dead, Sin wouldn't have to decide which glass not to drink from. There would be no Socrates-style execution with hemlock in 1 out of 3. No, one of these broads would cut her throat ninja style, and that would be that. And no one would ever question anyone, either. There was never this much hate in any one room, anywhere before. Sin was suddenly glad they were going to put her behind bars while she was here. She would at least be safe unless they poisoned her food. You could never tell about a bunch of lesbians. She swallowed hard and tried not to appear frightened. God help her if she showed any fear. If they smelled fear on her, they would tear her apart like wild dogs. The thought was terrifying to her. January 15th, 1992. Miss Tamara Simmons, care of Post Office Box 238, Los Angeles, California, 95413. Dear Tammy, it's Teresa. I didn't have your phone number, nor did I even have Keisha's old address, but I have something to tell you. Wendy is fine. I'm fine, and they are not looking for us very hard any more. I got your address at long last, from Mama, of all people. She found it in some of your things, and she sent it to me so I could write you. I want to see you again, but we are still in hiding. For that reason I can't tell you where we are in this letter, but I want to meet you and bring you here. You are not going to believe this place. Meet me at LAX over by the airline that Mama always flies. You know the one, so I don't have to say it. Like I said, if this gets in the wrong hands. Remember, the airline Mama always flies. I'll see you there. I'll meet you there on Daddy's birthday at 2 p.m. That's all I can say. I love you, big sister, and your niece loves you too. Remember, Daddy's birthday. Love, Teresa and Wendy Wee. On January the 15th, 1992, Sin Devereaux was taken down to the shed for her final bit of punishment before being released. She was secured to a block where she was awaiting Bear Ann and her strap. Bear Ann was late for the ritual discipline this morning. Sin was just anxious to have it over with so she could leave. Bucci walked into the shed and over to where Sin could see her standing there looking at her. Sin snarled and said nothing to her in turn. Bucci was not about to speak first. After a while, Sin asked her, "I suppose the little witch is alive," she said, as she strained her neck to look up from the leather restraints that held her fast across the block. "Yeah," said Bucci, "and Keisha's foot healed miraculously. Neither of these is any thanks to you." Sin chuckled sarcastically. "I want to tell you something," said Bucci. "I want you to know that I hate what you did. Not taking over, I don't hate that. Not threatening to kill me. That's expected in a rival gang of outlaws. What I hate is the way you tried to destroy the homes that I made for these girls. Now, I'm not Father freakin' Flanagan, and this ain't Boys Town, but it is a home for a lot of wayward girls. We try to keep the crime to a dull roar here, but you tried to destroy that. That's unforgivable. I want you to know that." "Yeah, well, I feel for you, Booch," said Sin, motioning with her head. "Why don't you tell Bear Ann to get her butt down here and whip me so I can go? I'm getting cold." Bucci laughed at her. "You don't quit, do you, Sinner? You just don't quit." Bucci walked over and took the restraints off Sin's arms so she could stand up. When she did, Sin rubbed her wrists to get the circulation back into them again. Bucci walked over and picked up Sin's jeans off the stool where she had had to take them off. She had been naked lying across the block, from the waist down. Sin threw her pants to her. Sin wore no underwear of any kind, and she smiled at the departing member of her gang. Sin caught her breeches in mid-air. "Put your pants on, girl," said Bucci. "Beating your butt is like beating a dead horse anyway." Sin was rather stunned by this show of mercy here at the last. She tried not to show it, but this was more embarrassing than having her butt whipped. Sin had been all ready to go for several days with a sore behind, but now to be let out of it. "I'd a thought," said Sin, "that you'd a wanted to have strapped me good, Booch. What's the deal?" "Maybe to show you a little mercy," said Booch, "where you don't deserve it. Maybe that will have an effect on you. I don't know. I know this, though. I don't want any more to do with you. You're trash, Sinner. Trash. And this morning I'm taking out the trash." Sin laughed at her and said, "Well, thanks. I really didn't want to be sore today, anyway. Can you throw in a tank of gas, too, before I bug out, since you're feeling so loving and charitable?" "Already serviced," said Bucci, "and ready to go. Come with me. The girls who brought you down here and tied your naked butt to the block, they all think you're going to get it good. But I said that no one was to watch this morning. Now be discreet the way you pull out of here. If they see you leaving, they'll know Bear Ann's not been down here, and they may jump you." "Okay," said Sin. "Thanks again." "Don't mention it," said Bucci. "Just go. Please, just go." With that, Bucci walked over and she unpadlocked a secret tunnelway out of the compound. She had used this way before whenever she would forgive soon-to-be ex-members of this exit whipping. "Outside of here," said Bucci, "about 50 yards from this door, sits your bike. Get on it and don't even wave to the girl on post. Got it?" "Got it," said Sin. "Thank you again." And with that, she was gone. Chapter 22. Bucci Simmons met Teresa and Wendy at the U.S. air counter on the day of their father's birthday, and they all had a nice reunion, standing there at the airport terminal. "Come on," said Teresa. "You are not going to believe the house the senator set up for us. It is a mansion. It's got everything. Can you stay a few days?" "I can stay as long as you like," said Bucci. That did not yet sink in, but Teresa and Wendy were so thrilled to once again get to see her that it passed unnoticed until later. They boarded a cab and took off up the highway for the house. Bucci had taken a cab herself to get to the airport. That way she wouldn't have to park her bike for any time in the long-term parking. Prices for that were ungodly. "Oh, it's wonderful, Tammy," said Teresa. "Little one and I have had a ball up here, haven't we, Wendy wee?" "Mm-hmm," said Wendy, eating an all-day sucker. It was a sweet and sour charms pop, and Tammy's mouth watered despite herself. She used to love those things when she was Wendy's age. Now it would probably give her the bile. The smell had not changed, though, in all those years. "There's a musical library second to none," gushed Teresa. "I have never seen so much music. I have only one complaint. I can't invite Maggie up to see it. I can't make her jealous, like she used to do me with all her stuff. The sound system would tear the windows out if it went much past 3 on the weighted digital dial of the amp." Teresa was like a child in a toy store. She went on and on about the wonders of the house and what all they had in there. A pool, a spa, televisions everywhere, satellite TV. "And I have plenty of money," said Teresa. "He sends us all we need. I'm like his secret lover or something, only he doesn't come in to tap me every once in a while as lovers like to do to you. I get it all for taking care of Wendy here." There was a strain in her voice that Tammy was picking up now. "Gilded cage, huh, sister?" asked Tammy with a knowing smile. Teresa nodded and said, "Yeah, but hey, babe, it's worth it. For a little one here, I'm going to tell you, it's really worth it." "Why don't you take a trip while I'm here?" said Tammy. "I mean it. Get out for a few minutes. Me and little Wendy wee will get on just fine." Wendy was staring out the window, paying them no mind at all. "All right," said Teresa. "I'd like that. A lot." "Good," said Tammy. "Then that's settled." "What about your gang?" asked Teresa. "When are they expecting you back again?" Tammy looked at her and laughed. "My babysitting days are over, doll," she said quietly. "I left them yesterday, and I'm not going back." "What happened?" asked Teresa. "Somebody else pull a Sin Devereaux on you?" "No," said Bucci, "nothing like that. It's just that you can't say goodbye to girls like those. They are so bloody dependent on you for everything. They always need mothering. They never become mothers themselves. They never grow up, Treese. I'm burned out on lesbian bikers." Little Wendy shot her a glance when she said the word lesbian, but said nothing. Bucci winked at Wendy, unaware that Wendy now understood perfectly what a lesbian was and what one wanted. "What about your horsemen?" asked Teresa. "Where are they at now?" "They have taken a truck," said Bucci, "up to a mountain place in Colorado. One of Spanky's grandpeople died and left her the place. We all 5 are going up there in commune together. Just us 5. It's gonna be great." "Yeah," said Teresa. "I bet it will." "You betcha," said Bucci. "Fishing, hunting, and just mellowing out. Maybe get a small beer-making kit and just go for it. Back to nature all the way." They were still a ways from the house when Tammy felt for the letter in her pocket. The one from Mrs. Bruchalier, Tammy's real mother. She had contemplated telling Teresa all about her real mother and what a neat lady she actually was. Not like Mrs. Simmons, their common-law mother. Not like her at all. True to his word, Rack Davies had written to Mrs. Bruchalier and had somehow found out Tammy's address, probably from the same pile of letters Teresa's mother went through, looking to find the compound's post office box. Nah, she decided finally. Why tell Teresa there's no Santa Claus? Why tell her we're not really sisters? What good would that do? Rack had admitted to Mrs. Bruchalier who he was and why he had done what he had done in a subsequent letter. Mrs. Bruchalier and Tammy the Booch Simmons were glad he had done so. It was nice to know that mother and daughter were not all that much different. "You should see the wine rack in this place," said Teresa. "I have a different bottle every day, and I still can't put a dent in that collection. My favorite is one called Chateau Neuf du Pape. I have no idea what it costs a bottle." "Plenty," said Bucci. "You got any left?" "One whole wall in the cellar," said Teresa. "Like I said, you just gotta see this place." Bucci smiled at her. Sounded like her kind of place. She couldn't wait to see it. They all settled back now, having talked for a few minutes. Well, it had worked out well after all, thought Bucci. Her girls would get along better without her. The VCR tape of herself that she had left, turning power over to Leather Heather, would be well received. Everyone liked Madam Prosecutor Heather. She was hard-lined enough to take good care of everyone. Besides, Leather Heather was the only one who really wanted to rule. The rest of them were content to be just followers. Now there would be no animosities towards the butcher nor her departed horseman. She hoped not, anyway. In the tape, Bucci had tried to explain all of her reasons for leaving. Maybe they would understand. Maybe. She settled back as Wendy lay back against her, accepting Bucci as an other Teresa. That felt good to know. It really did. And it all had been worthwhile, hadn't it? Yes, after all, it had really been terribly worthwhile. The end. The Epilogues. From the Diary of Wendy Wagner. June 6, 2005. Dear Diary, since I left my mama's house and went to live with my friend Marina, I have been hoping that someone special would come along for Mama, to be with her. I hated leaving her so much, but she insisted that I go. She didn't want to ruin me, she said. She didn't want to cripple me. Mama, God love her, is still a pretty woman. I think now she'll be able to find herself a man once I'm gone. I think that getting me out from underfoot was her way of saying, "Let me go too, Wendy wee. I need to grow now." Okay, Mama, I can handle that. I was able to attend a private school that the senator set up for me, and under the names of Wendelise Tuborgesa and her mother, Teresa Tuborgesa, we have managed quite well all these years. Sorry for not writing to you in a while, dear diary, but it's been a long time since I had anything real to say to you. I just graduated from the school. I make mention of this in case this gets found by someone after I'm gone. They won't be confused, dear diary, as to how I got my education and schooling, living with my own fugitive mother. Mama Teresa taught me everything, and though I learned a lot about sex and all, I mean to say, she never actually had sex with a guy, so I guess I'll have to do that on my own. Well, there is this guy, dear diary, and he says he wants to marry me. But I'm making him buy this little cherry. Unlike a lot of girls, I am making him want me because I am pure, and it's working too. He wants it bad. Mama was right about that. Mama wants to go see Aunt Bucci soon, and I'm hoping to get to go with her. It's been a very long time since I saw her. I really like this guy I am seeing a lot. Teresa Simmons Tuborgesa and her daughter, Wendy Wagner Tuborgesa, were in a rented car going up the side of an enormous mountain in Colorado, following some obscure directions to get to Aunt Bucci's house. Aunt Bucci and her 4 horsemen still lived up in these hills after all those years in the biker gang. The gang was still in L.A., and never did a rider go by on her bike that Teresa didn't long for Bucci again. Bucci liked her self-imposed exile, however. She and her girls were doing just great, she had written. Just great. "Mom," said Wendy, "you suppose that she's changed a lot in 13 years?" Teresa smiled. Her hair was just beginning to gray, and she had laugh lines in her eyes, but she still had that Teresa Simmons way about her, and that would help to keep her eternally young. Her hair was still long and pretty, noted Wendy. Teresa looked at her daughter. Wendy was the real doll baby these days. She had a perfect, absolutely perfect face and body. Teresa had seen her getting out of the bathtub one afternoon and had been stunned. She could make any man crazy with lust, had she been so inclined. And being raised by Holly Hobbie had its advantages, to be sure. Wendy was the purest, most beautiful, virgin girl there had ever been. Wendy had her feelings, of course, and many nights she would stay up late and read tawdry romances, with her light on, fueling her hot little mind and body with fantasies. That was perfectly all right with Teresa. Fantasy was the place to get all that out of your system and make and keep you sane. The fires of sex could ruin a girl if they were not channeled properly. "Yes, Wendy," said Teresa, "your aunt's hitting her 50s, babe. She won't be as we remember her. She'll be old now, like your mother." "You are not old," said Wendy. "Get real, for heaven's sake." "I see you," Teresa said, "in your perfection, and I know I am old. I am losing the milk of youth." "Milk of youth," roared Wendy. "I like that. You're lucky to have hit your menopause early. You know how awful it is to be so sexed out of your mind all the time? I'm hoping that marriage will suck, just so I can calm down some." Teresa laughed. "Yeah, I suppose that marriage will calm down the raging hormones, Wendy. Old age does the same thing." "Really?" "Yes," said Teresa, "it does." "Is the senator coming over next week?" asked Wendy of her ex-father. "I hope he doesn't forget to bring me that book he's been promising me for years." The senator had been coming out to see them, but not to tap Teresa. No, he had just been coming out to help Wendy adjust to her strange life as the daughter of several different people. "Book?" asked Teresa. "Yeah, the one that lists me as a real princess in it." "Yeah," said Teresa, recalling all of that. Wendy's parents. Oh yes, Wendy had met them 2 years ago on a trip to Europe. They were still living in exile, but the senator had arranged for them all to meet. Teresa recalled now what that had been like, getting Wendy all ready to meet her real parents. Teresa had been in her room alone one evening, just before Wendy was about to fly away. Wendy had caught her crying miserably. "Mama," said Wendy, "what's wrong with you?" "Nothing," Teresa had sniffed. "Get ready, baby, nothing at all." "I'm all packed," Wendy had told her, "but I'm not going at all if you don't stop this blubbering. I can't stand it, Mama. I'm not going over there to live with them, just to meet them." "I know, baby," said Teresa. "Forgive me. I'm sorry. I just think way too much of you, I guess." The trip had been a once-in-a-lifetime thing for Wendy. She had loved Europe and Austria especially. Her parents, though in exile, were living lavish and in style. Wendy had benefited enormously from the trip and the cultural exchange. But what had surprised Teresa the most was her daughter when she had come home again. "Hi, Mama," Wendy had called when the cab from the airport had come. "I'm home." Mama. She still calls me that anyway, Teresa had thought. "So how was it?" Teresa had asked her, as she had hugged and kissed her daughter. "How were they? Your real parents, I mean." "Okay," said Wendy, looking well fed and rested. "I had a great time, Mama. I did all sorts of things. Got me some great pictures and everything." She had spent a lot of money getting Teresa presents, going to meet her real folks for the first time, and here the kid spends all her time shopping for Teresa. "Your parents," said Teresa, grabbing Wendy playfully and smacking her on her buttocks. "You know I'm dying to know about them." Wendy laughed. Yes, she had been purposely fretting Teresa just then, and she had deserved the swat. She rubbed her bottom exaggeratedly, and she had laughed. "Okay," said Wendy. "I'll tell you all about my queen mother and her king husband. She looks just like me, and he looks just like the senator. All right?" "What are they like?" asked Teresa breathlessly. "They are like in exile," said Wendy. "Just like my other mother, you. They have to be so careful where they go and what they say, but they live high on the hog. Sounds like you. They aren't feeling any pain, Mama. They are like you are, well provided for in their gilded cages." "Do you like 'em?" asked Teresa. "Really," said Wendy, "they're my parents and all, and everything like that. But my mama's so, I don't know, hung up, fake even. It was all, 'Darling, how are you?' I was more like a schoolgirl visiting an embassy than a daughter going home to mother." Words could not have described Teresa's joy upon hearing this. For years she had always worried, what if Wendy goes to Europe and falls in love with her real mother? Now it was more like she had been to see a great painting or something. No big deal at all. Her mother was fake, hung up, like a painting. How wonderful, how nice. "What did you tell them about me?" asked Teresa, after that. "I said you were a great lady and that I was just like you," Wendy bragged, while Teresa's head swelled larger than life. "I said you risked your life to save me from Aunt Dame, who was hurting me. They were very impressed with you, Mama. They both said they would like to meet you some day." Teresa couldn't believe that. It was too good to be true. Teresa sat now, being called out of her reveries by her daughter, back to the present. "Mama," said Wendy, now in the car beside her, "how much further is this place?" "Don't know," said Teresa, patting Wendy's knee. No matter how big and sexy her girl ever got, Wendy Wagner would always be that adorable little plump princess in the gray overalls. "You getting hungry?" "Nah," said Wendy. "Just tired, I guess." "We can stop and stretch if you like," said Teresa. "No," said Wendy, reclining the seat. "That's okay." "Got any Led Zeppelin?" Teresa smiled. She reached over and jammed the cassette into the player. "All of my love" began seeping out of the speakers, with the violins rising to that wonderful slur. Just good old rock and roll as the good Lord intended. Wendy bebopped in her mind, moving hypnotically to the swaying beat. Teresa had just recently discovered the joy of Zeppelin. Before now she could not stand them. They hadn't made any sense. Now she knew what they had been trying to say. "Mom," said Wendy, "you ever miss the fact you haven't had sex yet?" Teresa smiled at her daughter. "Yes," she said quietly, "but I'm like Bucci in that way. I like sex, I just don't like men." Wendy grew quiet at that. Now was her question ready to go, for the first time ever. "Mom, is Aunt Bucci a—" "No," smiled Teresa. "It's taken you 20 years to ask me that. No, she's not, and she never was. She just likes to hang around them, I guess." "But doesn't it get, like, lonely and all?" asked Wendy. "I mean, wouldn't she be afraid she might get drunk and slip, or whatever it is they do?" Teresa looked at her and said, in a low tone, "Would that make her one?" "I don't know," said Wendy. "Being something and doing something is two different things, I guess, according to the college professors. But I think their rap is just to try and disprove God. They never get off that jag, you know." Teresa nodded. "Yep, I guess it's none of our business." "No, I guess not," said Wendy. "I have a big mouth." They arrived at the cabin before they knew it. Teresa whipped into the dirt driveway, which was more like a pig path, and she was stunned to see this place. It was out in the middle of nowhere. There was nothing at all for miles. The main building was the cabin. All around it there was this attempt at a wire fence, and then back behind the cabin was part of an old barn that had been erected to be a shelter for livestock. In front of that was the cabin and this chicken wire fence. It looked like Povertyville. That was about all there was. Woods swallowed up everything else, and there was a front yard of maybe 20 feet square. That was it. Nothing else. There were no motorcycles anywhere. Teresa and Wendy both sort of gasped at the same time. They looked at each other with a dread. They were planning to stay here a few days. Where would they stay? In the barn? Wendy tried to be brave. Her hand snaked over to Teresa's and gripped it tightly. Teresa gripped her back. "Well," said Teresa, "here we are. Home sweet something," finished Wendy. From around the side of the building came a small woman about 30. She was terribly pretty with her long brown hair and brown-skinned body, but she was wearing only overalls and no shirt. Her sweaty breasts fell down inside the bib portion, not too concealed at all. Her face was covered with dirt, and so were her arms and hands. She looked up at the car with all of the suspicion of country people who are disturbed in their zombie-like lifestyle. She squinted to see them, though the day was overcast and no bright sun bothered her. Wendy and Teresa felt like city slickers to the max. The woman was carrying a bucket of some sort and walked with the plod of one who is eternally plowing. She ambled up to the front of the car like a wild animal caught in imaginary headlights. Her face was that of the wild, animalistically inquisitive. Then, as if by magic, the girl's face broke into recognition. It was like the sun coming out from behind the clouds. It was also a little bit scary to be so recognized by... "Whew," said Wendy. "Awful glad Ellie Mae recognized us, Mom. We might have got our butts shot off." Teresa reached over and smacked her thigh playfully, saying, "Behave," while she tried to keep from laughing. Wendy was a sarcastic little something whenever she was frightened. Still, they didn't know who this woman was, nor even if they had the right hovel on the hillside or not. This should have been Bucci's place, but this here was not Bucci. The woman walked familiarly up to Wendy's side of the car. Wendy, who had always had a secret fear of lesbians since she had found out what they were, regarded the woman as a threat. She stiffened, and while her mother could not readily identify this beauty, she didn't want Wendy being inadvertently offensive. This might be very well the place Bucci lived now. "Wendy," warned Teresa, "roll down your window and talk to her." "Right, Mom," said Wendy, in sarcasm. Nonetheless, she did so. The girl who was popping gum walked up and leaned over the car, staring down into Wendy's face. The smell of juicy fruit gum wafted off the woman, and there was a smell of pure sex about her, a mixture of personal musk and something mysterious. Wendy was lured and yet repulsed at the same time. "Well, blow fire and spit cinders," said the woman, "if it ain't Wendy Wee Wagner, the little princess from Beluga Primary." The woman knew her name. This had to be the place. Who in the living H was this? Wendy grinned uncomfortably and looked across pleadingly to Teresa, who sat with the same stupid, puzzled look on her face. "Oh, heck, Wendy Wee," said the woman. "You know your old biking partner? Why, when you was a little bugger, dressed up in them overalls, I used to ride you all up and down the highway. You was a cute little spanker in them days, and you're beautiful now, babe. Teresa, don't tell me that you don't recognize old Spanky anymore. You're going to hurt my feelings." "Spanky," exclaimed Teresa. "My God, is that you, girl?" "It ain't none other than," she exclaimed proudly. "You sound different," said Teresa. "You didn't sound like yourself at all." Spanky laughed. "You spend 15 years up here with these hicks, and you come out sounding just like 'em." "Well," said Teresa, getting out of the car, "it's sure good to see you, girl. I want a hug." "Not now you don't," said Spanky. I smell like horse crap. I wouldn't be fit to tie up outside right now. Let me go get a bath and make myself presentable. I know I am offending you ladies. Shee-woo!" She made as if to sniff herself, and she winked at Wendy. It wasn't Spanky's smell that offended Wendy. It was that Wendy liked the way she smelled, and it scared her a little bit. Something wild and forbidden and, oh my God, exciting. "Okay," said Teresa. "We'll park out of the way over here." Spanky nodded and was gone. Teresa got back in the car and looked at her daughter again. "I actually know this woman?" asked Wendy, afraid. "You used to love her to death," said Teresa. "Lighten up, child. She's got a lady. Geisha. You probably don't recall her either. No one is going to make a pass at you. Please, act like you've been to Europe. They're family, for heaven's sake." "Family," said Wendy. "You think so?" "Child, I know so," said Teresa. "Nobody's going to hurt you." "Okay," laughed Wendy, "but if I decide to stay here and be a dyke when this is all over with, it's your fault. You'll have to explain to George why I jumped the sexual fence on him." "I will," said Teresa, "and you won't. Now lighten up." "Yes, Mother," said Wendy. "All right." They parked the car and got out as an older Oriental woman walked up to them. This must be Geisha, deduced Wendy correctly. This had to be her. She walked up and hugged Teresa closely. Then she smiled sweetly at Wendy. She made no attempt to touch her, though. "Hello, Wendy," said Geisha. "It's been so long, child." Wendy, despite herself, walked over and hugged the woman. The woman was nice and gentle, and she did not flinch from Wendy's embrace. "Hi," said Wendy. "I'm real sorry, but I don't remember you ladies too well." "That's fine," said Geisha. "Bucci's the only one you've seen in years, I know. And how long has it been since you saw her?" "Too long," said Wendy. Wendy liked Aunt Bucci a lot. Lickety-Split and Bear Ann were coming out of the house now, Spanky having told them that they had special company. Bear Ann ran up to Teresa and hugged her tightly. Then she stood back to get a good look at Wendy and nodded up and down. "Good job with this one, babe," said the aging biker. "I'm Bear Ann, Wendy. I know you have no idea who I am." She looked at Teresa and said, "You did a really good job with her." Teresa blushed. "Thanks," she said. "We want you to enjoy yourself here, Wendy," said Bear Ann. "We're all one big happy family. Old married folks, that's us. Come on in and be with us." Bear Ann continued, "Ladies, I know this looks like the butthole of the world, and from right here it does. But if you will accompany me through yon portals, I think I will show you great and mighty things which you know not." Wendy then genuinely smiled. Bear Ann had put her right at ease, and Teresa was happy for that, for more than one reason. They started off to the house with Lickety-Split and Geisha getting out the luggage for them. "This here," said Bear Ann, "is a full back-to-nature commune." They walked ahead of the girls, following them with their things. "We grow everything we eat, and we eat everything we grow. We got us a winery, brewery, stables, crops, and great karma. It's like the Garden of Eden out here. We get the seasons, and we get the richness of living without the headaches of outsiders. You two are the first people to visit us, save them who live locally." Bear Ann looked at Teresa. But Teresa shook her head no, not yet, and Bear Ann understood. "I like it," said Wendy, unaware of what impact that would have on Teresa. "I like it a lot." "We love it," said Bear Ann, "and you gotta love it to stay. That's the law of such places. If you miss your stereo or your TV set, don't come out here." They walked into the house part of this wonder. The inside of the place, contrary to the outside, was immaculate in all ways. Rugs were everywhere, and all the furniture was rough-cut and very cabinesque, and clean as a whistle. Wendy wasn't afraid of catching something in here. "This is our main hallway," said Bear Ann, "and all of our chambers are off to the rear, in the last wing back there." Bucci appeared from that area, looking much older and much sweeter than she had ever looked in her life. "Hello, little sister," She smiled and hugged Teresa. They both had tears in their eyes. "Hi, Mama," said Teresa, doing something she had not done in over 10 years. She called her older sister Mama, that pet thing they used to do together. Looking at the room here with all of these nice women, it was hard to believe that all but one of them was a wanted felon. Mama, that spoke volumes to Bucci Simmons Bruchelier. "I look like her now, I bet," smiled Bucci. "Just exactly like she used to look," complimented Teresa. "Just exactly." They moved into the main room and stood admiring each other for the longest time. Lickety-Split had killed a deer that week, and they were still eating a good deal of steak off the animal. The rest of it they were salting away for later. "Got a small generator what runs the fridge and freezers," sniffed Lickety-Split, whose hair was still blonde as could be. "We keep meat pretty good in that thing." "Where are your motorcycles?" asked Wendy, suddenly realizing what was missing. "We ride horses now," said Geisha. "Real ones, not the chrome ones anymore." "You guys ever hear from the succuba?" asked Teresa, as Spanky came out of the bathroom. She had had a cold shower of hand-hauled water, and she was wiping the water out of her ears. She was dressed more modestly now in white t-shirt and blue jeans. No socks nor shoes. Her t-shirt read, "Jim Morrison lives," and there was a low picture below the wording. "No," said Bucci, "not for years. Not since we left. The succuba probably got tired of messing with us and trying to keep us from running off. I don't blame them for not coming out here, you know. But I would love to see them all again. I think it would be neat." "Yeah," said Geisha, "but they probably wouldn't recognize us at all." They all moved into a side room that had not been visible from the front of the place. The house was much longer than it appeared to be from its impoverished front. It was the strange, linear way it had been constructed. They all sat down to eat and have a great meal together. It was during this meal that Teresa and Bucci finally told Wendy of their plans. All of the horsemen had agreed to do this, and Teresa wanted to do it too. Bucci, the matriarch, was chosen to tell Wendy in front of them all. Her tone was sober and easy now. "Teresa wants to come and live with us, Wendy," said Bucci. "How do you feel about that?" Wendy was stunned at first. "Mama? Up here? What would Wendy do in L.A., alone, without her beloved Teresa?" "You will not be alone much longer," said Bucci, reading her mind. "I believe you have a man in your life now." Wendy nodded, still numb. "And you'll be marrying him, I suppose, won't you?" asked Teresa, quietly. "You know I might, Mama," said Wendy. "Well, you are off now living with Marina, anyway, and I see you once a week and all, but I just don't feel right living in the senator's place any more, Wendy. He's getting old, and he's about to retire. If he died tonight, they'd swarm that mansion like a lot of hungry vultures. I won't have his protection much longer, Wendy, and I don't know if the feds have a state statute of limitations on kidnapping, but I didn't want to go to jail then, and I don't want to go now either." "I understand, Mama," said Wendy. "I was getting concerned about you. I wondered if you were getting lonely in the big house without me." "Yes," said Bucci, "she had gotten lonely. She just didn't want to admit it. But she made her home with you when you needed her, and now she needs us, and we can give her a home here too. Whatever she needs, we can give it to her. She was, is, and has always been one of us, just like you." Bucci looked at Wendy and said, "Just like you, Wendy." "That's a fact, little girl. You come and see us any time. We're not taking your mother from you. We're giving you 5 new aunts." "Okay," said Wendy. "There's just one thing I have to ask of all of you." The air got quiet as she said that. They had all wondered how little Wendy was going to take losing Teresa, and that was one of the reasons they had invited them both up here, to lessen the blow a little bit. Teresa had been Wendy's mother for a long time. Wendy was the reason they had all met in the first place. Wendy was the reason that Teresa had involved herself with these girls at all, and Wendy's say was important to them. Like Teresa herself, every time one of the horsemen looked at Wendy, they saw the little child in the gray overalls. They weren't able to see the gorgeous, stunning piece of woman flesh she had become. No, all they could see was that cuddly, adorable, plump little princess in the gray overalls, little Wendy Wee. And she was still as important now as she had been then. One thing to ask of them. "What's that?" asked Spanky, still terribly enamored of Wendy. "Can I get to ride your horses?" They all sat back and breathed a sigh of relief. Wendy had accepted her mother's decision, and it was going to be all right. They all looked at Wendy and realized something terribly important. They had worked for a long time to get Teresa and Wendy together. Now they all four were at last trying to take them apart in a perverse twist of fate. They wanted that split to be happy, if at all possible. And it was. "I would not have had my mother at all," said Wendy seriously, "had you guys not helped me. Oh, the guy in black, that Morrison fella, he was a great help, but you girls would have found me anywhere I was and brought me back again. Rack Davies was doing it for money. You guys didn't get anything. You guys did it because you cared." "Girls," said Wendy, "I give you my mother. Take care of her. Love her as I have loved her. And thank you for her, and for you, all these years." "Sure," said Spanky, touching Wendy's hand. "You can ride my pony with me, Wendy. It'll be like old times, the two youngest of us, out riding all over again. The two babies in this outfit, riding high. Shee-woo!" Wendy smiled at Spanky, for the first time in over 10 years. "I would love that, Spanky," she said. "I really would." Wendy looked back at the other girls, and she was not really surprised to see that the tension of their visit had at last been released, and there was not a dry eye at that table, Wendy's included. Afterward. Teresa Ann Simmons moved in with Bucci and her girls the next month. They all 6 lived quite happily together for many years. Wendy's little visits became less frequent, and 3 years later, Bucci and Teresa realized it had been about a year since they had heard from her at all, save for one very important letter. So they were very surprised one evening to hear a knock at their door. Answering it, there were 3 people there: Wendy, George, her husband, and one other little precious guest. One little guest wrapped in pink blankets and quilts. "Grandma Bucci," said Wendy, as Teresa came up behind her, her hand to her mouth in total shock, "I would like to introduce you to your newest gang member. This is my daughter." Teresa, who knew Wendy was expecting, had no idea she would see the child so soon. Not like this on a warm summer evening. Not like this at all. Teresa was crying as she accepted her granddaughter and held it for Bucci to see. Spanky, Geisha, and Lickety-Split crowded impatiently, waiting their turn as well to see the child. This was a wonderful thing for them all, Wendy's first child. "What have you named her, baby?" asked Teresa, as Wendy kissed her on the cheek. "What do you call something this precious, this sweet? What's her little name?" Wendy swallowed and looked into Teresa's eyes. "I call her Teresa," said Wendy, her voice choking a bit. "Teresa Ann Simmons. For you see, George's last name just happened to be that as well." Teresa put her hands to her face and bawled in utter joy.